The janitor was just finishing his usual cleaning routine when a little child ran up to him, eyes wide with urgency. The child grabbed his sleeve and whispered 3 strange words that made his blood run cold. What could a child possibly say that would shake a grown man to his core? Before we get into this unforgettable story, make sure you're subscribed to Epic Story Moments. Do not forget to hit that bell so you never miss another amazing tale. If you enjoy the story, like, share, and leave a comment. It helps us bring more heartwarming stories your way. And we would love to know, where are you watching from? Let us stay connected. The janitor's hands trembled as he stared at the child. Those words, they were impossible. They should not mean anything. And yet, they unlocked something in him. A memory he had buried deep, one he never wanted to face again. But now, he had no choice. The janitor, Mr. Raymond, had worked at Willow Creek Elementary for nearly 20 years. To the students, he was a quiet old man who mopped the floors and fixed broken lockers. To the teachers, he was reliable but distant, never sharing much about his life outside of work. He preferred it that way. His past was something he had spent years running from. Until today, it was a chilly autumn afternoon when it happened. The 2nd grade class had just been dismissed for recess, their laughter filling the hallways. Mr. Raymond was in the cafeteria, wiping down tables, when he felt a small tug at his sleeve. He turned to see a little girl, no older than 7, staring up at him with big, curious eyes. Her blonde curls bounced as she shifted on her feet nervously. "Mr. Raymond?" she asked softly. He smiled kindly. "Yes, sweetheart." She hesitated, then leaned in closer and whispered 3 words that sent an icy chill through his entire body. "The red bird." For a moment, everything around him blurred. His vision swam, and a sharp ringing filled his ears. He had not heard those words in decades, not since that night. The mop in his hand slipped and clattered against the floor, making the little girl flinch. His heart pounded so violently, he was sure she could hear it. What did you say?" His voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. The girl blinked innocently. "The red bird. My grandpa told me to tell you." Mr. Raymond's breath caught in his throat. His fingers twitched. His entire body went cold. "Grandpa?" The child tilted her head, confused by his reaction. I have to go," he muttered, stepping back. He turned quickly and hurried down the hallway, gripping the edge of the nearest wall to steady himself. His chest ached with a panic he had not felt in years. He needed air. He needed to think. Slipping out the back entrance, he stood in the shadow of the building, gasping for breath. His mind was spinning. He had locked that memory away, buried it so deep it should have never resurfaced. Yet now, out of nowhere, a child, someone completely unrelated, had spoken the very words that haunted his past. And she had said her grandfather told her to say them. The problem? Her grandfather should not be alive. He was supposed to be dead. The past resurfaces. Raymond clenched his fists. He had spent years escaping that life, building a new one from the ashes of the past. But now, the past had found him. It all went back to a single night, decades ago. A stormy evening in the old town where he grew up. The rain had been relentless, pounding against the roof of the tiny house he shared with his younger brother, Tommy. Tommy was only 10 at the time, full of wild imagination and dreams. But there was one thing he feared more than anything: the red bird. It was just an old tale their grandfather used to tell, a story meant to keep them from wandering too far into the woods. He would say, "If you ever see the red bird, do not follow it. It only appears to those who are lost, and once it takes you, you never come back." Raymond had always dismissed it as nonsense, just a legend, until the night Tommy disappeared. He had woken up to the sound of the back door creaking open. By the time he reached the door, all he saw was a flash of red feathers vanishing into the dark woods, and Tommy was gone. The search lasted for weeks, but no trace of his brother was ever found. No footprints, no clothing, nothing. Just gone. Their grandfather never spoke of it again. But that was the night everything changed. The night their family fell apart. The night Raymond lost not just his brother, but himself. Back to the present. Mr. Raymond gripped the cold brick wall of the school building, his breathing uneven. That little girl's grandfather. Was it possible? Could it really be him? He needed to find out. He wiped his hands on his uniform, steadied himself, and walked back inside. The little girl was still in the hallway, humming a soft tune, tracing circles on the tile with her shoe. "Sweetheart," he said, forcing his voice to stay steady. "Your grandpa, what is his name?" She looked up at him with a bright smile. "Tommy." The world tilted. The air left his lungs in a sharp gasp. He stumbled back, eyes wide in disbelief. "No," he whispered. It was impossible. It had to be impossible. Tommy was gone. He had disappeared that night. And yet, standing in front of him was proof that he might have survived. But how? Where had he been all these years? And why, after all this time, was he sending a message now? Mr. Raymond's legs felt weak. He had to grip the nearest row of lockers to steady himself. The world around him blurred. Tommy? Alive? His mind refused to believe it, but his heart knew better. The past he had buried, the pain he had tried to escape. It had just come knocking on his door in the most impossible way. His hands trembled as he knelt in front of the little girl, his voice barely above a whisper. "Honey, when did your grandpa tell you to say this?" She scrunched her nose in thought. "Last night. He told me a story before bed and said, 'Tomorrow, you'll see a kind man named Raymond at school. Tell him.'" She mimicked her grandfather's deep voice. The red bird. A shiver ran down Mr. Raymond's spine. The red bird. That was the last thing he had seen before Tommy vanished. His breathing was shallow. His heart hammered so loudly that it echoed in his ears. "How? How old is your grandpa?" he asked, dreading the answer. The girl giggled. "Silly. He's old, just like you." That did not make sense. If Tommy had disappeared as a 10-year-old boy, then how could he be alive today, old enough to have a granddaughter? Nothing about this added up. Mr. Raymond swallowed hard. He needed answers. "Where does your grandpa live?" The girl's smile grew wider. "He lives in the woods, in a big cabin. Mommy says we cannot visit him too much, but he always tells the best stories when I go." His chest ached. The woods. Where Tommy had disappeared, Mr. Raymond could barely stand. His hands were clammy, and his mind raced with terrifying possibilities. Had Tommy been alive this entire time? And if so, why had he never come back? The journey to the truth. That evening, Mr. Raymond sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, staring at the address the little girl had given him. It led deep into the countryside, near the very forest he had spent years avoiding. His fingers traced the paper. Should he go? Would he find his long-lost brother, or something far worse? He needed to know. With a deep breath, he grabbed his coat and keys. It was time to find Tommy. The road stretched endlessly under the glow of his car's headlights. The deeper he drove into the countryside, the quieter it became. The town lights disappeared behind him, replaced by towering trees and the eerie silence of the wilderness. The address led him to an old, winding dirt path that cut through the forest. His heart pounded as he followed it, his fingers gripping the steering wheel. The memories came rushing back. The night Tommy vanished. The red bird. The way his grandfather had refused to speak of it again. After what felt like an eternity, a wooden cabin came into view. It was larger than he expected, nestled between the trees like it had been there forever. A single lantern flickered on the front porch, casting an eerie glow. Mr. Raymond parked the car and stepped out, his breath visible in the cold night air. The place felt wrong, like time itself had stopped here. He approached the front door, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. With a shaky hand, he knocked. The door creaked open almost immediately, and standing there, Bathed in the lantern's light was Tommy. The impossible reunion. Raymond gasped. His brother looked the same. Not older. Not changed. He was still the 10-year-old boy from that night. Raymond staggered back in shock. No, no. This is not possible. Tommy tilted his head. Ray. His voice. His childlike voice. Raymond's stomach twisted. He had expected a man, someone his own age. Not this. Tommy's eyes shimmered under the dim light. You finally came, he said softly. Raymond's mouth was dry. How are you still a child? Tommy smiled, stepping aside. Come inside, and I will show you. Everything in Raymond screamed no, but he had come too far to turn back now. With hesitant steps, he followed Tommy into the cabin. Inside, the place was warm, filled with old furniture and the faint scent of pine. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and a fire crackled in the stone fireplace. But the air felt heavy, like something unseen was watching. Tommy led him to a wooden table in the center of the room. On it sat an old, tattered journal. Grandpa left this for you, Tommy said, sliding it forward. Raymond picked it up with shaking hands. The pages were yellowed with age, the handwriting familiar. He flipped through, skimming passages, and then he found it, the truth, the curse of the red bird. His grandfather's words spilled across the page, written in frantic, uneven handwriting. The red bird does not take you. It traps you in time. Those who follow it are never lost. They are frozen. Tommy did not disappear. He was stolen by the forest, and he will never grow old. Raymond's blood ran cold. He turned to Tommy, his breath shaky. How long have you been here? Tommy's innocent smile remained. I do not know, but I have been waiting for you. Raymond's hands trembled. Waiting for me? Tommy nodded. The forest let me send a message. Just once. I knew you would come. Raymond's heart twisted in horror. Tommy, we have to leave. Right now. But Tommy just shook his head. I cannot. His smile faltered. You should not have come, Ray. Raymond froze. The lanterns flickered. The warmth of the cabin seemed to fade. And then he heard it. A faint whisper. A rustling outside. And the distant, haunting sound of wings flapping. The red bird. The shadows in the room shifted. The air turned cold. Tommy took a step back. It knows you are here. The panic surged through Raymond's chest. We are leaving. Now. Tommy's eyes glistened with sadness. I told you, I cannot. And before Raymond could reach him, the lights went out. The cabin plunged into darkness. And a voice, not Tommy's, whispered in the air. You came back, Raymond. Now. You will never leave. To be continued? Darkness swallowed the cabin. Raymond's breath hitched as the warmth in the air drained away, replaced by an eerie chill that seeped into his bones. He could not see Tommy anymore. He could not see anything. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. A whisper slithered through the room. You came back, Raymond. Now. You will never leave. Raymond's hands fumbled in the darkness, reaching for his brother. Tommy, grab my hand. His voice cracked with desperation. A small, cold hand found his. I told you, Tommy whispered, his voice trembling. You should not have come. The shadows shifted. The air pressed down on them, like an unseen force, heavy and suffocating. And then, the lanterns flickered back to life. Raymond gasped. He and Tommy stood alone in the cabin, the furniture undisturbed, the fire still burning. Had it all been a hallucination? But then, Raymond saw it. The red bird. It perched outside the cabin window, its glowing crimson eyes locked onto him. A shiver ran down his spine. It was not just a bird. It was something else. Something old. Something watching. Raymond turned to Tommy. We are leaving. Now. Tommy's face was pale. He shook his head. I told you, Ray. I cannot. Raymond grabbed his brother's shoulders. Yes, you can. You are coming home with me. Tears welled up in Tommy's eyes. Ray, I do not belong out there anymore. Raymond's chest ached. You belong with me. Tommy swallowed hard. If we try to leave, the forest will not let us. Raymond's grip tightened. Watch me. He grabbed Tommy's hand and pulled him toward the door. But before they could take another step, the door slammed shut. A sharp gust of wind blasted through the cabin, blowing out the fire. The walls creaked and groaned as if they were alive. And then the whispering started again. He is ours. Just like before. Raymond's stomach twisted in terror. No, 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 no. He turned back to Tommy, his pulse racing. We fight it. We run. No matter what happens. You do not let go of my hand. Tommy hesitated. But then, for the first time, he nodded. The cabin shuddered. And then, the walls began to vanish. The wood melted into the darkness, dissolving into the cold night air. The floor beneath them disintegrated, revealing an endless void below. The cabin was gone. Now, there was only the forest and the red bird. It hovered before them, its body glowing with an unnatural light. Its wings did not flap, yet it remained in the air. It was not a bird. It was something far worse. The whispers surrounded them now. He stays. You leave. The wind howled. The trees bent toward them, reaching like hands. Raymond's grip on Tommy's hand tightened. No, you will not take him again. Tommy cried out as a force yanked him backward. Raymond held on. He pulled with everything he had. The shadows wrapped around Tommy's feet like vines, pulling him toward the void. Raymond's fingers slipped. Tommy screamed. Raymond roared with fury, pulling with all his strength. And then everything stopped. The last choice. Silence fell. The wind was gone. The shadows retreated. The red bird hovered motionless. And then it spoke. But it was not a whisper anymore. It was a voice. Deep, ancient, unforgiving. A trade must be made. Raymond's blood ran cold. What? The bird's glowing eyes burned into his. Only one of you may leave this place. Raymond's heart stopped. No. No. This could not be happening. Tommy shook his head violently. Ray, no. I will stay. You have a life out there. You... Raymond cut him off. No, his voice was firm. You have been trapped here long enough. Tommy's eyes filled with tears. But you will never go back home. Raymond forced a smile. I do not care about home. You are my home. A deep, sorrowful silence passed between them. Then, Tommy lunged forward and hugged him. I love you, Ray. His voice broke. Raymond's throat tightened. I love you too, kiddo. The red bird flapped its wings. The wind returned. The shadows swirled around them. And then, Tommy was gone. The final goodbye. Raymond collapsed to his knees. Tommy had vanished. In the distance, the red bird perched silently on a tree branch, its glowing eyes watching. And for the first time, Raymond understood. This forest was not just a place. It was a prison, a guardian of lost souls. Tommy had been set free, and now Raymond had taken his place. He slowly stood, looking out at the endless trees. The wind whispered through the branches. The night stretched on endless and silent. Raymond smiled. His brother was safe. That was all that mattered. Even if he never left this place again, the forest had won. But so had he. 1 year later, a little girl sat on her bed, her eyes wide with excitement. Tell me a story, Grandpa, she giggled. The old man chuckled softly. All right, sweetheart. Let me tell you a tale about 2 brothers and a red bird. The little girl tilted her head. Is it a happy story? Her grandfather hesitated. Then, with a warm smile, he kissed her forehead. It is the happiest story I know. And outside, in the darkness of the woods, a red bird watched. The end.